So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be going to the great state of Florida and be discussing a disability issue of a police officer who shot themselves while drunk on the job. They were an alcoholic employee, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit just recently issued a ruling on this matter, and it's Harrison versus Sheriff Holmes County of Florida. There's a lieutenant with the sheriff's department who had serious mental health issues and alcoholism, and the police department knew about it. The sheriff department knew about it. They were known to the employer. And while he was working a call one day, the employee called a colleague who he had an inappropriate relationship with. That colleague's name was Fleming. And so the employee called Fleming while they were drunk, crying, and just out of their mind. Fleming went to where the police officer was pulled over and watched him shoot himself. And he did not die. But while he was in recovery, and this is a really tricky thing, I think that probably there would be more. There'd be a better way to do this. But while he was in recovery, the lieutenant's manager, so up his chain, said, well, if you don't resign, we will investigate you. And the reasoning behind their investigations were, quote, unbecoming conduct, quote, use of intoxicants, and, quote, testimonies and truthfulness. Just immediately thereafter, Harrison resigned after he was being informed that he was going to be investigated. And he actually was told that he could come back in a year, but was never ultimately rehired. He eventually sued under the Rehabilitation Act, which is kind of interesting. It's not one that I was aware of because of the nature of where I've been employed in my life, but the Rehabilitation Act is similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it's actually for public employees. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was a landmark piece of legislation in the United States aimed at protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities and promoting their full participation in society. The key provisions of the act include Section 501, which requires affirmative action and non-discrimination in the employment of individuals with disabilities by federal agencies. 502 establishes Architectural and Transportation Barriers Compliance Board. 503 requires affirmative action and prohibits discrimination by federal contractors and subcontractors. And 504 is the most significant, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance. So it's a really widespread and wide-reaching act that, acts in many ways similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Ultimately, the 11th Circuit said, nah, Harrison, your argument is not any good. And the reason because his misconduct of shooting himself was actually tied not to his disability at all, but the act of shooting yourself on duty while drunk. Now, the lieutenant said, no, it was directly tied to his disability of alcoholism and depression. And so the 11th Circuit Court said, no, you can't do that because it's a fireable offense irrespective of whether his disability involved depression and alcoholism. And this is one situation that I kind of see frequently, not particularly this serious, but I frequently see people attempt to enact or invoke the ADA after they've been caught sleeping. And that's really not the time. If the Americans with Disabilities Act is to apply, it should be notified, previously, but really it doesn't stop you from being fired for what is ultimately a fireable offense. You're not being fired because you're disabled. You're being fired because you're sleeping on the job. And that's kind of what the 11th Circuit ultimately says here. The lieutenant was drunk on call behind the wheel of the car and shot his gun in the presence of others, endangering the community at large, the people around him, everyone involved. And that's consistent, of course, with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissions, and they put through a guidance called the Applying Performance and Conduct Standards to Employees with Disabilities. And so, the ADA ultimately doesn't protect employees from consequences of violating conduct requirements. There should be employers, of course, have to provide reasonable accommodations for these known disabilities, but it's important for these employees to still follow the rules and, in this case, follow the law. And so, of course, the 11th Circuit upheld Holmes County, Florida in this scenario, and as a result, this employee was not reinstated into their job. What do you think about this? Is this a reasonable decision on the part of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit? What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye, guys.